Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Bo and Brian, for being here today. Bo, you've been active in shaping conversations around digital assets and regulation as the CEO of USAT. How do you see the stablecoin landscape evolving in the US and globally?
Well, I'll start with my time in the White House as the executive director of the Crypto Council. David and I synced up on the transition team in November after President Trump had been reelected. And we had mapped out a plan to deliver on the president's promises in the United States. As he openly stated, he wanted our country to be the crypto capital of the world, and we had a lot of work to do. The ways in which we move money in the US and globally, moreover, have been archaic for quite some time, and I liken it, to the ways in which technology has evolved and how we communicate. It's changed rapidly over the course of the last 2 decades. The ways in which we move money really haven't. And so that's why what we're doing at Tether is so exciting. Digital dollars with open corridors, expeditious transaction settlements, more cost-effective transactions. We wanted to see this injected into the US financial system, and that's why we spearheaded the Genius Act, which truly does revolutionize our system in the United States in numerous ways. And so, that was a massive accomplishment for the administration. I think it sets the standard globally for what we should be doing to address stablecoins. And we'll continue to push forward. I know I have my fantastic former colleague, Patrick Witt, who's now spearheading the Crypto Council in the US, and they're working on market structure legislation as well. All of these things will help shape the next generation of finance, and I believe that Tether will be at the forefront of that. And with USAT, this will be the first licensed stable product offered in the United States. We hope this becomes the institutional product, but also the product for those that are underserved and underbanked in our country and globally as well. So we hope to create seamless interoperability between USAT and USDT. I think that we'll do that rather quickly, and I think it'll change the financial landscape for decades to come.
And Brian, you recently joined Stable as co-CEO from the venture arm at Block One. What drew you to this role, and how do you see Stable's role in the stablecoin and payments landscape?
So joining Stable was a pretty big no-brainer for me. It was the right time. There was a lot of disruption that could be made, and I think that Stable's technology stack is what's making it a leader in the payments rails. Stable has really focused on how to make payments using USAT, USDT as a currency that can be used globally. And I think without having a proper layer 1 that's dedicated to payments, we couldn't really get that scale. I know, talking with Paulo and everyone, that the goal, the next milestone in digital currencies and stablecoins is to reach the $1 trillion mark. In order to do that, you have that AUM, we need to have a system that's dedicated in order to build the infrastructure that's needed. So I think joining Stable was a very easy decision for me because we had a great team, we had great connections, and with that, we're able to put forth that mission and deliver on it in a very timely way.
Bo, from your perspective, what is the most important factor in building regulatory clarity for stablecoins, and what international impacts do you think Genius has brought to the market?
Well, the rules of the road have to be clear. I mean, for decades on end, founders in this space, in the digital asset space that is, have been victims of really policymaking through prosecution and persecution, at least in the US, and I know that that's also been the same globally in many jurisdictions. And so what we wanted to do is create a clear regulatory framework that showed founders what they need to do in order to build and innovate. And I think that same standard should be applied to other jurisdictions around the world. And with Genius, we have a clear reciprocity standard for the US. The Treasury sits over the top of that and defines what it means to be a dollar-backed stable in our case, which means you have to be one-to-one backed. You have to be audited by a Big Five. You have to show your proof of reserves. All things that protect consumers, and that's something that we care deeply about at Tether. And obviously, we'll be the first Genius-compliant stablecoin product offered in the United States, with Anchorage being our issuer. And I think that with this, you'll see widespread institutional adoption very quickly. I think that banks will start to offer these products and the custodian services that come along with them. When David and I first set out in the White House, we envisioned a world in which we'd move to tokenized public securities in 24/7 markets, and all the things that many folks in this room have probably dreamed of for quite some time. Creating seamless on and off ramps between asset classes with dollar-backed stables is immensely important in terms of making sure that money flows and moves smoothly throughout the globe. And I think we're on the precipice of accomplishing that. And so I know they're working on legislation here, they're working on legislation elsewhere. I think that you'll start to see Europe mimic what we did in the United States very quickly. There's almost a firewall now to the U.S. capital markets. If you want to engage, as we move towards tokenization, you'll have to use a dollar-backed stable, and that's what positions Tether with such a unique advantage. But I think USAT will be a tremendous complement to that. With the corridors that we have, almost 500 million customers, we're hoping to be the institutional product that's offered in the U.S., and I think that that'll happen in short order.
Brian, how do you believe the Genius Act and emerging stablecoin regulations will influence Stable's role in shaping the future of the global payment system within the financial landscape?
Sure. I think the Genius Act was that watershed moment that blockchain has been looking for the past decade. In order to get institutions to use blockchain and use crypto and stablecoins, we needed the regulatory compliance that could be followed. As Bo was mentioning, globally, the Genius Act is kind of setting as the standard that other countries and other jurisdictions are going to follow in order to make it so you can use cryptocurrencies across borders, get that instant finality in transactions, and reinvent the financial system that currently exists today. I think all of us here have had the issue with transferring money across borders, the problems that exist with that. And we're not able to, we haven't had an advancement in the technology in so long. And I think this, with the Genius Act, having the government pass it is really a way that we can start that change. And I believe that with institutions, they want to have certain coverage. So as Bo mentioned with the compliance side of it, if you want to get the banks on board, you had to have the certain layouts of how they can use the currency and know what they're going to be reporting on.
Brian, one more question for you. Many chains aim to be general purpose, but Stable is laser focused on payments. How do you see Stable contributing to the future of global digital payments, and what advantages does it bring specifically?
So at Stable, we really focus on that payment level of layer one. And I think with all the previous chains that have been out there, there's a lot of congestion. And with that congestion, there's a lot of fees. And with those fees, you also have to pay them in a different token. And when you have that dual token system with that volatility that exists with the gas token, it makes it really hard for financial institutions to adopt using cryptocurrency. They don't want to take on that risk. If the bank is looking to move $100 million 10 times a day, they don't want to have a gas token that they don't know where the direction is going to go. So at Stable, putting forth that payment system, or payment rails that allow institutions to use it with paying fees in USDT and trading USDT and derivatives of that, we're able to actually have a faster system that doesn't have the congestion. We know the fees are going to be low, and with peer-to-peer transfers, which I think is another big part of Stable's mission, is that those are gas-free transactions. So users are able to send money to each other in the same manner, in the same speed, without that congestion fees that are normally seen in the current layer one protocols. And I think the move to the 1 trillion or having that killer app that's using cryptocurrency has been missing is a dedicated system for payments. And I think at Stable, the whole team is really excited for developing this because we've all tried using cryptocurrency, and I know the user adoption has been great, getting to the 260 billion mark, but what we've been missing is how do you get people who aren't currently on crypto, who aren't currently using stablecoins? And I believe having a system, whether it's our protocol or the apps that are built on our system, enables those users who had been kind of weary of it, were not knowing how to use a key identifier or put their private keys. We've really abstracted that all away, and we built a system that allows every user to use crypto in a very traditional sense.
Bo, from a policy lens, how important is it that stablecoin projects are working directly on the last mile of adoption, which is getting stablecoins into everyday payments?
Well, look, I think that the technology that's emerging from this space is starting to become injected into the traditional financial institutions very quickly. And folks are starting to realize that this is the next generation of finance. This is the next generation of how we move money. There's no longer a scorn towards blockchain technology in public ledgers. We're seeing banks get more comfortable with understanding, how compliance works in this new age. And, as we set out to create a regulatory standard in the US, we were super conscious of the fact that it needed to be clear and concise. And that's something that we had been echoed by founders for quite some time. And our goal was to bring as many folks back onshore into the US, where we have the deepest capital markets in the world, so that they could actually build and innovate there. And I think that that's what we've done with Genius, with the stablecoin legislation. And I mentioned the reciprocity standards being adopted globally. I think that'll happen very quickly. And you'll start to see these products be offered by financial institutions that are moving large amounts of money globally, whether it be in the commodities trade, whether it be through the purchase of tokenized public securities, and getting rid of these intermediaries that cost businesses and consumers so much money every year is drastically important. It changes the way in which we move money globally for years to come, and that's something that we should all be extremely excited about. And I think that, obviously Tether being the Goliath in the space, we're really excited about what Stable is building. We think that they're a fantastic product, and we're extremely excited to support them in their efforts and their launch. Tether has been agnostic with L1s, but a product like this that's new and unique is just immensely exciting for everyone here. We're looking forward to supporting in whatever way that we can. And you'll see as we roll out USAT, hopefully with some big announcements to come in the next couple of quarters, Stable will play an integral role in how we move our product.
We're excited about it. I know that with USAT, with the rollout, you guys picked some, the top partners out there. We're excited to be able to provide a product out there to the globe, enabled to using things like Anchorage in the background. USAT is really going to set itself apart because currently, as you mentioned with the institutions, having a platform that doesn't have that deep stack of not just the technology, but also the institutional players, we're not going to be able to get the banks, we're not going to be able to get the safety and security of moving money without those players. So we're really excited to work with you and Paulo and everyone else at Tether and USAT. So we're excited to see what happens.
I think it's fantastic.
So it's been a huge year for stablecoins and crypto in general. What do you think will be the enduring changes when we look back at this year for stablecoins?
Go ahead, Brian.
I think the biggest part is obviously the AUM is going to change, but also I think the small transactions. Right now, stable coins are being used heavily in South America and in Africa for remittance, and I think that's been the growing undercurrent that has led stable coins to become how large it is today. But I think the larger shift we're going to see, as Bo was talking about, the merchants that are currently paying 3.5% and 4% to do a simple transaction when buying a coffee can now move away from that system, using a system that is either low fee or no fee. And I believe that will continue on where you're going to move money from one person to the other. You shouldn't have all these intermediaries involved. Rather, we want to go true peer-to-peer where there's no middleman, no one else is taking that cut. So I think we're looking back from a year from now, looking back to this, we'll wonder how we ever had such a complicated system and how much easier it is then.
Yeah, I think the global financial system will be much more fluid, and that benefits everybody regardless of which country you live in or under what regulatory regime you persist. And so as we look at this new world and this evolving financial system, I think that you're going to see technology continue to progress. I think you're going to see the ways in which people move money continue to change. Obviously, Stable plays an integral role in that, and others as well. But at Tether, we're uniquely focused on providing services to those that are either underbanked, debanked, don't have access to traditional means of moving money. And in the US, that's no different. So, our product, while it will be widely adopted by US financial institutions, and we hope it becomes the main method of moving large amounts of money overseas, whether it be through trade or other means, we're still focused on our mission, which is to help those that have been forgotten and lost in this system for quite some time. I think that just looking back on what's happened over the course of the last decade is really important. As I mentioned earlier, many folks in this room, many founders in this space were truly victimized. It forced a lot of people offshore in the US since, obviously, there's a lot of activity in Dubai and other places. You're starting to see that change. You're starting to see people come back to the US. You're starting to see people be comfortable building there, which is immensely rewarding to see the product of our labor and our work with Genius. And so I would encourage other countries to follow the reciprocity standard outlined in Section 3 of Genius. I would encourage them to look carefully at the language that we use, because every word was chosen extremely carefully. Language matters when it comes to digital asset regulation and policymaking. Every word is important. The president said something that was quite remarkable when we held the first White House Crypto Summit to many of the founders that were there in the space. He said, you had a better chance of being in jail last year than you did being in the White House talking to the President of the United States about what you want to do with your businesses here on US soil. And it's true. I think he actually said that to the Winklevoss twins directly. And they echoed that sentiment. So we're starting to see what a sea change looks like. The tide is turning. And we just want to continue to foster that. Tether playing such a critical role in the ecosystem. We want to make sure that we're driving other projects forward, that we're helping to invest. Obviously, Tether has numerous investments and is building out fantastic technology in many different verticals. I encourage any of you out there in the crowd to reach out to us if you have an interesting idea, if you're building something that could be useful in this space, because we're here to help. We're here to be active participants. And we want to make sure that we're pouring back into this ecosystem that's done so much to revolutionize how money's moved over the course of the last few years.
And just one more point on that is with Tether, when you touched on the people who are unbanked, it's surprising because 1.5 billion people currently don't have access to banking, whether it's their jurisdiction or their level of wealth, but they still have the need for money. And I think that's the piece that's been missing or been overlooked is that you still have to do transactions. If you can't have the bank account, there were predatory systems, whether it was in Africa where they had mobile banking that really took away from the fees that were so high. And I think Tether is instrumental in how they rebuilt that. So now with a mobile phone, you can get that instant access to capital, whether you're transacting or buying or receiving. And I think that's where we're really going to see those that were unbanked is really a way to go upwards in the economy to look at the US where you're mentioning before, it was not as crypto friendly as it is now under this administration, and we're able to get things, be the leader. So I think the Genius Act is a really good way of putting America first and that global currency and being able to use that as a direction that everyone can start using with reciprocity, using that currency globally and actually have transactions that move at the speed that we are expecting.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the number of people that are debanked or underbanked or underserved. For a long time, they tried to say that Tether was servicing a niche. That's 1/3 of the global population. It's quite remarkable when you think about it that way. It's quite a large niche. And so now we see these products become institutionalized. It certainly changes the game. But one thing I'll mention is over the course of my time in the White House, it was fascinating to see how the traditional financial institutions started to adapt and evolve. At the beginning, they were still quite skeptical of the technology emerging in the space. They didn't understand it, and things that you don't understand are oftentimes scary. As clear rules were laid down, we started to see a rush of folks knocking on our door asking, who can they work with? Who are the right partners? Who's building the best technology? And it shows that they're keen for adoption. And I think that our Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, said that he expects the stablecoin market to be over $1 trillion in the next few years. I certainly believe that's the case. I think it could actually be exponentially higher. As more public securities start to become tokenized, the on and off ramp is going to be a dollar-backed stable. And it acts as a firewall to the capital markets in a tremendous way, but I also think it helps with global trade. It helps with the commodities exchange in the US. For a long time we've struggled in that space, at least at home, because the settlement times were just so long. It didn't make sense. And so that's changing extremely rapidly. And the sky's the limit in terms of where this can go. At Tether we love Bitcoin, we love gold, and we love the US dollar. And we'll continue to promulgate and propagate all three.
And one more point to that, when you mentioned with the unbanked and how that's been a fiction that has been solved, and it used to be considered the niche, and I think that's an interesting point with dovetailing what you said about the banks or traditional financial institutions, was that it had always been looked at that they didn't need to make the change. And when Bitcoin started coming to the market, they knew the technology was good, but with any disruption out there, there's always that risk or that fear, where they're fearing of what it's going to do to their current business model or what fees they're going to lose. And I think now they've learned to embrace. So the next step of that, that integration or that on-ramping of crypto is, as you're saying, now every financial institution is trying to either launch their own coin, try to see how they can integrate, because they know that it makes their work easier and safer and better. Because we look at how Tether, for example, has now done more transaction volume than Visa and MasterCard, yet the fees are so high. And I think that's been a problem, is that they didn't have a disruptor. You didn't have to improve your pricing. You didn't have to change your business model because there was no one coming to compete with you. And I think now those institutions are actually seeing it as, how do we embrace this to make ourselves better? So it went from being a competition to being a tool that they want to use and deploy at their base level.
I agree with you. Rising tides raise all boats. And I think that's what we're seeing occur here. Again, I just want to thank the Stable team. I want to thank Korean Blockchain Week, all the folks that are here, all the founders that are here, all of you that have persisted in the midst of chaos and uncertainty for over a decade. I think that clarity is finally here, and that's a very positive thing for the space, and we hope to continue to push that forward. And Richard, I want to thank you, Cantor, being a tremendous partner of Tether as well. I think it's going to be a fantastic next 48 hours, and we look forward to everything that's going to be built.
Thank you both for coming. So in the 30 seconds left, I guess, Brian, to wrap up, what are the key milestones that we should look for in 2025 for Stable?
Sure. So Stable's really excited. We worked really hard this past year, put a lot of effort into building our product, and I think what we're most excited for is the launch of our system, our Mainnet, and with that, shortly thereafter, we have our mobile app that's going to be launched. And I know the wait list launched yesterday. It was getting really good traction. I think that really speaks volumes to the warm reception we had here at Korea Blockchain Week and getting to work with you guys is that people are excited to have something that really is going to make that paradigm change that had been missing in the ecosystem for so long. And so, I'd see by the end of 2025, we're most excited for having everything launched that we've been building.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Bo and Brian.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Brian.